everyone, and welcome to another episode of Stitching Tales. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe.
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about our favorite sewing tools, because as we all know, once you start getting into sewing, not just your garment, your wardrobe expands, also your toolbox expands quite a bit. But it's sometimes hard, I think, to know which tools are really worth investing in and which one could we skip. So we thought we'd do an episode where we share our favorite tools, and hopefully you might get some new ideas for things that you might want to buy. Hopefully a lot of these tools aren't too expensive. At least I don't think mine are. Malena, do you have a mix of more pricier items or some cheaper ones?
No, to be honest, these are very straightforward products, so easy accessible.
That's excellent. So, Malena, shall we start with your first tool? I'm really curious. And also, if you're watching the video version of this podcast, you can see the tools. We're going to hold them up. So you can go over to YouTube, Stitching Tales Pod, to watch the video version. But we're also going to update our Instagram account, Stitching Tales Pod, with images of these tools as well. So, Malena, now go for your first tool.
Yes, it's actually 3 tools. I'm going to show them now. It is the scissor collection. And since I am from Finland originally, of course they are all Fiskars. That is the favorite brand. Even if this one, this scissor is black, it's still Fiskars. Fiskars is known for their, orange handle. So yeah, this is the fabric scissor. This is the paper scissor. And this is the one that I should always have, hanging from my neck, so it's easy to snip off those threads. But I always misplace it, and I never find it whenever I need it. So I don't know. The habit has not really, stuck to me. But Finnish people, I think in general, are very loyal to Finnish brands. So I would never use another scissor than Fiskars. A friend of mine was like, yeah, but try this one, try mine. I was like, no, Fiskars, I'm loyal, sorry. So yeah, my number one favorite thing. And I know that, don't cancel me now, I know there's a big no to use the scissor, the fabric scissor to anything else than fabric. But Fiskars, they do have sharpeners that, fairly inexpensive ones, so you can sharpen your scissors by yourself. So I don't cut paper with this one, but when I cut notches, I also cut through a little bit of paper, and it's fine. You can sharpen them. But I do have my paper scissor, so just for the record. So yeah. My absolute favorite one.
That's so interesting. First of all, I had no idea, and I apologize to all Finnish people listening now. I didn't know that Fiskars was a Finnish brand. I know it wasn't a Swedish brand. So, sorry, apologies. How do you feel about me now, Malena, when I share this embarrassing information?
No. It's not always, it's not that they go out and be Finnish brand, but but when I was in school, for example, I studied in Turku, in Åbo. We actually had, I don't know if it was a designer or product developer or whoever it was from Fiskar, actually, who had a lecture for us. And it was really interesting to hear. Even though I studied fashion design, and they have more tools and they are not in the clothing industry at all. But one thing that really I remember from that lecture was him saying that whenever you have an idea and people are like, oh, that's really, really easy idea, and you can figure out that you can figure out yourself, that's a really brilliant idea. So that has really struck to me that whenever an idea is that simple that you think oh, I could have come up with that myself, then it's a brilliant idea, if it doesn't exist, already. But so yeah, that's really, I remember that lecture very, very well. So yeah, we are very loyal to our own brands.
Yeah, that's so good to know. And Fiskars is a great brand, and it's very, very common in Sweden as well. And I only, in my kitchen, I always use the Fiskar kitchen scissor as well. Also, such a beautiful design. I think it's honestly one of the most beautiful. It's a very timeless, almost like a 60s vibe, I think, with that beautiful orange. But you can get them in black, and some come in red and green. So, I mean, they're just a beautiful addition, I think, to your sewing space as well, because they're such a beautiful, functional, and I love the grip of them as well. So, and when you were speaking here, I just ran over to my pegboard to actually, because you brought up some good points. And actually, what I have, and I'm holding up this now, is the scissor sharpener from Fiskars.
Exactly the one.
Because that's such an amazing investment, and it's not expensive, and you can actually you achieve a lot. I mean, of course, you can get these. I've also had scissors professionally sharpened, which is great. But if you for a lot of purposes, and this is a great little tool. So the Fiskars, I just remember to address that. So I'm also Fiskars fans for the record, even though I'm actually going to hype another brand of scissors in a bit there. And also speaking of Fiskars, I also use their rotary cutter as well, which I also think is a really good product. It has a very ergonomic handle. So again, Fiskars, yeah, we are on the hype train for sure. For Fiskars.
So what team are you on? Scissors or rotary cutter?
I'm definitely team rotary cutter. Yeah.
Scissors.
Yeah, I can imagine. You're much more of a classic. I'm I honestly think I'm more of a gearhead than you are. And I will definitely share a little bit more about that in a bit. Why I prefer to use the rotary cutter, but so that's a really good tip. Then I'm gonna counter your hype for Fiskars by also hyping up another fantastic scissor brand, which is Kai scissors. Now these are pricier than Fiskars, but I will say though that the softness and the cutting experience I think is better than the best high-end Fiskars. Apologies to all Finnish people. And also this is I think it's a Japanese brand, so I'm definitely not helping Sweden either by hyping this. But I was skeptical of the experience of buying a super high-end pair of scissors, but then I tried this in a fabric store, and I was so amazed, so I actually bought one myself, and I haven't regretted it. I've had it sharpened once professionally, and it just made it just as fresh as new. So yeah, and also because this is so expensive, I didn't have the bravery to use the Fiskars scissor sharpener, but I used the scissor sharpener for everything else. But this one is sharpened by a professional.
Yeah, but that makes total sense, because the sharpener, it might be something with the angles. I don't know if they are compatible. How do you say? So yeah, I would be careful with that using other like expensive brands. It might mess it up. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's a very good. If you really want to go and pay the price, I can definitely recommend Kai scissors. I think those are the best brands, Fiskars and Kai, and also there's Ginger scissors, something like that. I think are really good as well, but I haven't tried those because they are not available in Sweden. What was I going to say about that as well? Yeah, but for paper cutting, I use the Fiskars scissors, of course, as well. So I have a black one, just like yours.
But do you have, when you say you use the rotary cutter, do you have like some fabric you use for the scissors and some for the rotary cutter, or how do you do?
Yeah. So what I'm holding up now is, of course, the rotary cutter. I have actually two. Just one generic and one Fiskars, and I'm a big fan of the rotary cutter. I think it's basically, I think it's the case when it comes to technique. I know some people are really, really good at cutting. And also here I'm going to go on a tangent, because I heard a story, and I don't think you told me this one. There was a friend of mine. She said that she had heard that in school now, we don't cut as much anymore. So young children are less skilled with using a pair of scissors. And this could be absolutely, I have not fact-checked this information, but I find it's really fascinating because I do think that cutting is a skill that you need to practice. And so that's therefore really interesting, how our skills changes with technology, that I probably a lot less people use the scissor as much for precision cutting. So to go back to my point here is that I am one of those people, even though I do, that I honestly have problems cutting really straight with a pair of scissors. But I find that with the rotary cutter, I can cut so precise, and I just love, the whole experience of like pushing the pattern down and just rolling and cut close to the edge. And I love how sharp the edges looks. And of course, there are some fabrics that are easy to cut. And one drawback of using a rotary cutter is that you need to switch blades fairly often because they do get dull, especially with certain fabrics. So as soon as, you feel like you have to tug to get like through the fabric, then of course you need to change the blade. So it's not a cheap solution. I think it's more expensive in the long run than using a pair of scissors. But for me, I find that I get much more precise cutting, and it's also faster. And I honestly, that's definitely one of my least favorite things when it comes to sewing, is to have, trying to cut out a million pieces. So for me, anything that makes it easier. And I also have a cutting board, of course, that makes it easier as well, in standing height with a large mat. So when I had to do it on the floor, I guess it was not as great. But so that's my love explanation for using a rotary cutter over scissors when cutting fabrics. But I mean, anything goes, honestly. Just pick your best method, I think. Do you ever use the rotary cutter, Malena, or?
I have used it, so I have tried it, but yeah, I think the blade was not really that sharp, so it left like those small, like where it hadn't cut through the fabric properly, so then you had to redo it anyway. And also, I don't know, to make sharp curves, I think it's more difficult to be precise compared to using scissors. So I have given it a chance, but yeah, it wasn't not my cup of tea.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. And I should also say, you bring up a good point about the small corners. There are actually smaller size rotary cutter as well, so they have a smaller blade, which I think is about 1 inch wide instead of, I think this one is about 4 centimeters. So I use that as well sometimes for the shoppers. But of course, I'm not like, I have to use the scissors at times too, because, not all things are suitable for using the rotary cutter. But, for long, like legs on a pair of trousers and stuff like that, I just love the rotary cutter.
Yeah, but that makes sense, and I understand. Like, okay, I do understand the positive aspects about the rotary cutter. Yeah, but no scissors. And I also always like cut the notches after I cut the project. Like I cut the notches like at the same go as I'm cutting, and that one you can't really. I find it so difficult with the rotary cutter to make the exact stop. But with the scissor you can really be like, okay, I want 3 millimeters cut for the notch that I can easily control. But with the rotary cutter, like where to stop, you don't really see like the cutted edge in the same way. So I think that's mostly the reason why I stick to the scissors.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point. I've tried to use the rotary cutter for notches, but unless the seam allowance is like 1.5 centimeters wide or 5/8 inches, I think it's almost impossible to not cut into beyond the seam line. So that's also another like good case to buy really good quality scissors, because these are just much more easy to cut those tiny notches that you need, because they just have to be a couple of millimeters, like 1/4 of an inch or less. So it's very helpful to use scissors for that purpose. And if you don't have a great scissor, you're going to have problems, I think, cutting notches as well. Because that's right. That's both of our favorite way of marking notches. You use the scissors too, right? You don't use pen or Oops. Yeah, it's a
it's easier for me to always just cut them, because then they are there. If you mark them with a pen or like a tailored chalk or whatever, they can, if you don't sew it immediately, it might disappear with time if you for some reason have a break before you start sewing.
Yeah, absolutely. I also recommend it. Sometimes also, I think with the tracing tools, you usually have either one problem. Either the chalk disappears from the fabric before you start sewing, or the tracing color gets stuck into the fabric, so you can't get rid of it. And of course, you can't iron over these colors or chalk or tracing colors materials, because then they get like permanently fixated to the fabric. So to me, it's very seldom that I find that tracing is the best method, because it's either one of these two problems happens to me like at least half the time. So I very, 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 very rarely I rely on scissors for the most part as well.
Good.
All right, then.
What's your next gadget?
Yes, then I'm going to talk about, speaking of notching, because I don't just use scissors for notching. I also have my absolute favorite tool. I think everyone who's have followed some type of content that I've done over the years know that I'm such a big fan of these. So what I'm holding up now, if you're not watching the video version, is two sharp tools. It's called, I will probably butcher the pronunciation here, but it's called awl, I think, AWL. So this is a sharp tool that is used, I guess it's a hardware tool basically. So you can use it to pierce holes. For instance, if you're doing belt loops, you can pierce holes. But what I use these tools for is to do marking. So for instance, if I'm sewing a dart, I don't use tracing paper. Instead, what I do is that I cut, at the edges I use a scissor, but then I pierce tiny holes using, this is a tailor awl, this is a narrow one. I pierce tiny holes inside the dart leg, so to speak. So then when I'm sewing, I can use these tiny holes as a guide on how to sew. So I find that's really, really easy. And the great thing is that you don't, because this tip is so narrow, you don't ruin the fabric. It's just that it helps to gauge when you're sewing. So, and then of course, when you wash the fabric, the threads will just pull together. So you haven't really ruined your fabric. And of course, if there would be a tiny hole, it's still enclosed inside the dart seam. So I use these all the time for knits and woven fabrics and everything. And I also now holding more heavy duty. This is one I bought in a hardware store, and this is great if you want to do say buttonholes on jeans, for instance, and piercing holes. Maybe you want to add rivets, then you can use this sturdier awl, and both these are really, really inexpensive. So if you haven't tried this, I definitely recommend. I'm also gonna link to some content that I've created on different ways you can use an awl, because I think if you haven't gotten on the awl train already, then it's definitely time, because it's such a worthwhile investment, especially as we mentioned when we talked about marking notches, the fact that it's really, really hard to get the collar to stick, or sometimes it sticks too much, especially if you're working with delicate fabric. So I very much recommend getting an awl or two, like I do.
I have actually never tried them, but then you do, like the holes are basically created when you push in the edge, like they are, how to say, separated, and that creates the hole.
Yes.
The threads doesn't actually break then.
Exactly. So
that's smart.
Yeah, so that's why the one I'm holding now in my hand, it's a very narrow tip, so it's called a tailor's awl. So it's wider than, but honestly, I think you could probably get around it by just using a larger sewing needle, because it's about, the tip is about the same size as a larger sewing needle. It's just that it's a little bit sharper, because larger sewing needles can have a little bit of a blunter edge. But yeah. So that's the beauty of the tailor's awl. So you have to get a specific one. It's called tailor's awl.
Cool. Yeah, I have never tried one.
Haven't you gotten on the awl train already?
No, not yet. But sounds very interesting. And I've seen it on lots of your like blog posts and YouTube tutorials. So it seems like a very handy tool.
Yeah, and also in our book Fit for Knits, I also show how you can use an awl also to mark darts, for instance, if you're curious about this method as well. And you can also find tutorials on my blog on how to sew darts using the awl method. And it's not just me doing it, rather very famous in the sewing world, the Palmer Pledge brand. They've written a lot of sewing books, and they also show this method in one of their books. And also, I've seen it in several sewing books. So credit where credit is due, and it's also, I think, used sometimes in more a professional setting just because it's so quick. So it's a very good tool to have. All right then, Malena, that was my tribute to the awl. So what's your next tool?
My next tool is actually this one. It's a little... now I completely forgot the English word for it.
Tweezer, no?
Tweezer, yes, thank you, tweezer. So it has a little bit of a different shape compared to a regular tweezer that you use for your eyebrows. It has a really long tip and a little bit of an angle. And these ones are so handy when you have to rethread your overlock machine, or when you really have to, like, because of the tip is so small, you really can easily reach some difficult places. So this one I use fairly often, and it's so convenient if for some reason your overlock, usually when I rethread my overlocker, I just tie up the threads with the new thread spool, so you don't have to rethread it by hand. But sometimes it doesn't work, or the thread the knot comes unloose or something. So yeah, then this is my savior. So this one I really recommend. And I had no idea where I got it from. I think it was one of those that when you bought the machine that this was included. So it usually comes with the machine. But very, very handy little tool.
Yeah, it's very, very good. And I think it's almost, if you get a brand new sewing machine, I think it's almost always included in the kit, especially if you get an overlocker. I think it's always included. And as you say, it's so good because of the shaping of the tip. You can really grab the threads. And I find also with age, it's getting a little bit more difficult sometimes to see and catch those tiny threads. So I have also find myself using the tweezer more and more because it's such a, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It makes everything so much easier because the grabbing is great. Yeah, so that's probably something you don't even have to go out and buy either. It's probably somewhere in your tool stash already. So I agree with you. A great tool.
Yeah, really, really convenient. What's your next?
Yes, so my next tool here is actually, yes, I'm gonna pick up because I have a few versions here. Now, sometimes it's hard to sew straight, especially if you're sewing parallel lines, and you maybe don't have. For instance, if you're sewing a wide hem that is wider than the plate on your sewing machine, I think it's also go up to maybe 4 centimeters or something like that, or which is about less than 2 inches usually. So sometimes you want to sew something that is wider. Or sometimes, for instance, you want to stitch parallel lines if you're doing like shearing, or stitching elastic with several rows, and so it's hard to measure then because the distance is wider than your presser foot, so you have to do something else. And this is a tool that is often included in sewing machines, and it's also included if you get a walking foot. And I think it's called sometimes it's called a quilter's ruler or a sewing guide. So what I'm holding in my hand now is a metal tool that is like shaped like an L, and the long bar you insert inside the back of the presser foot, and then you just tip this down, and you can just adjust the length by just moving it inside a hole. It's usually attached with a screw, so you can get very exact distance, and these just lie so straight. So even if you're sewing a hem that is maybe 10 centimeters wide, which is about 4 inches, then you can still sew straight. So I absolutely love this tool, and I think it's underutilized, especially because just like with the tweezers, you probably already have this, so you don't have to go out and buy it. And if you're going to buy it, I think it's less than a couple of bucks. It's very, very inexpensive tool. And also if you have a walking foot, I think it's almost always included in that toolkit as well. So underutilized, but I use it a ton. It's my secret to sewing straight.
I haven't used it like a lot, but I have definitely used it, and it's so convenient when there are no like steps that like you can do exactly that measurement that you specifically need. So it's very, very smooth and convenient to use.
I know. Also, it's funny because a lot of the stuff we're talking about now are very straightforward. They are not, as you say, it's not very complicated, technically advanced tools. They are extremely simple tools, but they are usually the ones that are the most effective, I find. So it's not a lot of gadgets, I think, for neither of us today. I think it's very basic stuff. All right, so Malena, what's next on your list?
Well, next on my list is actually, I'm a little bit embarrassed to show it, but it is my needle cushion. You say that?
Pin cushion, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one is actually, I made it myself.
Ooh.
And the elastic here that you have on your arms, it's very convenient. You carry it around wherever you go. It is starting to become so old that it's just growing, and I had to. I mean, I haven't even sewn it. I've just one I've sewn and one I've just pinned because it's like starting to lose its like recovery ability. So yes, now it's a little bit.
I should say that if you don't watch the video version, it's actually like kept together with a safety pin. So you have shortened the stretch out elastic with safety pins as well. So every time it grows,
it's so hard to
you do a
sew straight seam. Takes a lot of time. Those things that you never get around to do.
This is definitely why you should watch the video version, especially of this podcast episode, because it's really nice to see Malena's. It's super cute, but it's also kind of funny.
Yeah, and I made it myself, and this is like a wool that you felted. You wash it with hot and cold, and you make it like a bowl basically. So it was really easy to do, and the needles are really like it's very suitable to use wool for your needles because it's really easy to push through the needles. So yeah, this one has it has been with me for a long time. I don't even remember how old I was when I actually did it, and also I'm a little bit embarrassed to like. I'm going to show you my needles, how they're looking now. I have so many needles that basically have a 90 degrees turn on them because I might have sewn over them with my sewing machine. And
so you don't remove the pins when you're sewing.
Most of the time I do, but not always. And I was always like, no, again, with this annoying needle. And then I just put it, further away so I don't have to take that one again. But I should just throw those needles away. But those things that take like half a second to do, like sewing that instead of having a safety pin. Sometimes I have a hard time to actually take the time and just do it.
Yeah. Now, also, again, if you're not watching, that was fascinating to see because you held up a pin and it was a sharp 90 degrees L-shaped.
Sharp.
And it was like, how is it even possible to bend a needle that sharp? It looks, or a pin. It looks, it almost looks like it was meant to be that way. So I thought you were going to talk about, you have some specialty pins with that.
No, and I have even several. Yeah. do as I say to do. Don't throw over the needles. Don't do as I do. I don't recommend this at home. So yeah. Confession time.
Yeah, was absolutely mind blowing and wonderful. I apologize for all if you're listening if I had to I just laughed right out in the microphone and your eardrums exploded because it was so funny. Oh my god! Yeah. I think
that's my needle cushion situation.
Yeah.
What type of do you use for your needles or pins?
Yes. So what I'm holding up now is the magnetic pin cushion. So I don't actually have one that I made myself, but I have got from my mother a gift using this kind of felted ball as well, which is I agree with you. It's a fantastic material to use for pins, and it could be like a nice do-it-yourself project as well with this felting method. But what I'm holding in my hand now is made with plastic, and the great thing about it is that it's magnetic. So you can of course throw the pins and it will catch them. But what I love most about this is that it works like a pin hover. Like when you hover, you're cleaning your floor. So because my pins have a tendency of disappearing. I don't know.
They vanish in the thin air.
Yeah, and they keep throwing themselves on the floor by themselves.
For some reason.
For some reason. So every time I sew, I have this, the floor is covered with pins, and I have no idea how they got there. And also, when I used to sew at home, and of course other family members, they weren't too happy about this situation. So this is so great. So I just hover over the floor. So I'm on my knees hovering. So because I find that I could pick up the pins with my hands, but I think this is much more fun. So that's why I love the magnetic pin cushion. I also have a similar one that you have, but I don't have it on my wrist, and I definitely think I will definitely do that as well, because I agree with you. It's so nice to have it accessible, just like when you show the thread snipper when you talked about scissors. I have the same thing. I have it, and I never add the neckband for it. So but it's so ideally it should always be like kit. Have the thread snipper around your neck, and then the pin cushion around your wrist, because just these tiny things makes the process nicer and smoother. So that's really inspiring. I'm definitely going to try to find the band for it. But again, this magnetic pin cushion is very, very inexpensive to get. So if you have the same problems with needles throwing themselves on the floor, then maybe this is the solution for you as well.
We had I've used those in school as well. I mean, they are so convenient, and especially if you have lots of threads and small pieces of fabric, and you just, as you say, hover over it. Since it's magnetic, the needles will still appear. So it's really convenient to find all the different pins and needles. Have you ever used clips?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, I don't have it picked up now, but what we're talking about is clips. I think the one of the brand names is Wonder Clips, and so they're small plastic clips that are a little bit sturdier than paper clips. So you can, and I use them actually quite a lot sometimes for certain things, because sometimes it's easier to use the clips than pins, especially if you're sewing over heavier fabric layers, for instance. I actually prefer them, and they're also very easy they're even quicker to remove, because it's like now we're going to try klädnypa. What do you say?
I don't know.
The thing that you attach when you're on a washing line, and then you have garments, and then you use this. I'm just
something that pinches. Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay, but I think everyone listening know what we're talking about. This is made with wood or plastic. So the clips are similar in that way, just a tiny version of it. So I have one smaller size and one larger size. And the good thing is that they are not too expensive either, and you don't need a ton, because you can just, I think having like between 6 or 10 is enough. So it's not a big investment. So yeah, I definitely do them as well. But I also find that with experience, I don't know if that's the same for you, Malena. I find that I need to pin and secure pieces less and less because I get better and better with controlling them with my hands. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, definitely. And I have not guilty pleasure, but like when I'm scrolling on my phone and looking at Instagram, I follow a few professional production like real garment production accounts. And to see like the skill level of those seamstresses, they never use pins ever, or not never ever, but yeah, basically never. They have it in their hands, like they just fold fabric pieces what's needed, and they are just like so secure with their hands, and it's just like mesmerizing to look at them, just how they are working. So yeah, no, in the like real production industry, they don't use pins. So yeah, it's definitely like an experience in your hands. I would say how much pins you use. Yeah. But for home sewist, do whatever you feel most comfortable with. Yeah. I use pins when I sew. It's no like the less you use the better. Like no. Whatever it's easiest for you, just do that.
Yeah.
But, no, definitely so mesmerizing to just watch those really like experts when they are working. I really enjoy watching it.
Ah, that's so fascinating to hear. I'm going to try to find some of those as well, because yes, and I agree with you. Especially, I think as we are also sewing, we have an understanding of exactly how difficult it is to be precise with your sewing and how many hours and years of practice it takes. I think that's one common struggle when you start to sew, is that it's really difficult to control the fabric. So you get I think for us as being in this world, we get even more impressed by this, because we totally understand how difficult it actually is to get really, really good at sewing. I think it's fascinating how difficult it is.
Yeah, and it really like goes also to show like, if you have it as a hobby, like don't beat yourself up if you're not on the same level as professionals. It's like, well, I'm not gonna even imagine that I'm gonna be as good as my yoga teacher when I go to a yoga class. That's her profession, and she's really like, that's what she does for a living, and I do it maybe 1 hour every now and then. Of course I'm not gonna be as good as her. I'm not gonna beat myself up because of that. So it's like, don't compare yourself and your skill level. Just do it in your own time and whatever you feel comfortable with. So, but yeah, it's always, of course, so nice to see some really experts, any experts in their field, like so fast, amazing how fast they are, and so precise. It's really.
We have so much capacity in inside ourselves as humans. I think all the things that we can learn, all the crafts and everything, and also the value of repeating stuff, as you say, Malena. I think it's the same, of course, if you want to maybe fix your home, for instance, and it's if you do it yourself, painting or doing wallpaper, it will not be as good, because these people have years of training and years of work experience. So I think sometimes we have rather unrealistic expectations for a lot of crafts that whether we kind of forget that it's also a profession, that people do this for a living every day, and we are trying to, as you say, Malena, we are thinking that we have unrealistic expectations on what we can achieve as random hobby sewists. It's for instance, even if you sew for many years, I've sewn, literally for over 40 years regularly. I still am not in that kind of category because I don't do it enough, and I don't have, also a lot of, being self-taught, and of course they have good training of other experts in their field, so which we also don't always have access to ourselves.
And do it for 8 hours a day. Of course you're gonna get skilled when you do it like that often. So yeah, it's a profession.
Yeah, that's why we're good at our day jobs. Perhaps not as sewing. There's probably a correlation there. So, I mean, I'm very, very skilled at writing, and you're very, very skilled at pattern making. So, but sewing is still both a hobby for both of us, even though we do this also as a business.
Yeah, so true.
All right then. So now it's time for your next tool, right? Because I talked about the pincushion.
Yeah, my next tool is actually a very, very straightforward measuring tape.
Ooh.
And this one in particular I really like because it has centimeters on both sides. I know I have some of these that have inches on one side and centimeters on the other side. But then it's always like you have to find the right end when you start to measure, because, you know, it's on this one, either way, you're gonna like, it's, how do you say, just make sure that it turns right and you can easily measure it. So for me, since I always work in centimeters, I prefer this one that only has centimeters. And also a tip, on the edge is usually some metal thing. I usually remove them. On this edge I have removed it, because as you can see, now I'm really showing a close-up, on one edge, it's actually 1 millimeter longer compared to the other one. And it's really difficult to see here, like, so how is the metal piece actually attached to the measure tape? Like, it could be like 1 millimeter off in either direction. So that's why I always try to remove it. And here I should actually like trim this edge a little bit so it's like really, really straight. But for me, gives me more control and to see exactly on the millimeter, like from where to measure. And this one usually always stays here around my neck. But I mean, obviously I have several of them, and sometimes they all disappear as well. So it's like, how is that even possible?
Maybe they do like snakes, you know, they rattle away when we sleep or something like that.
Yeah, might be, yeah.
Yeah, this is a good point. Because you showed me this tip when we met up and we did some prep work for a book, and I had no idea. And also for you who are only listening, it's more than a millimeter off. And I had no idea. And of course it makes total sense now, but it can definitely mess things up. And as you say, you don't know, is it 1 millimeter? Is it 2 millimeters? Is it absolutely at the edge? Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And also a good thing to, usually when I put these away, I, roll them up but don't do it too tightly, because obviously, I mean, over time, they can stretch a little bit as well. So don't stretch too much, because if you use it for several years, they might grow. I mean, this is like might grow 1 or 2 centimeters on a whole measurement tape that is like 1.5 meter. So it's not a lot. But if you are on a like very precise millimeter, like it is, those all the extra millimeter counts. So yeah, be careful with your measurement tapes. But this is like my absolute most used tool in my studio. Like I use it on a daily basis. And also instead of using a calculator, it's like, no, just example. Okay, so 25 centimeters, what's the half of that? Then I just, 12.5, great. That's how, instead of using calculators, I just divide them or take the double amount, and yeah.
That's so clever. Really that's so clever. That's like an analog calculator.
Yeah, very analog.
That's brilliant. I never even thought about that. I'm always the one, fiddling on my phone, trying to find the calculator and doing stuff. So that's really quick. What a great tip. And also,
yeah, because but the reason why I do this so often, also like half and times 2, is because in production you have always you send the paper patterns out, and then you also have a measurement list for a supplier to be able to easily control some measurements. And on woven, you measure the whole garment, like the whole chest on that garment. But on a jersey, you measure it half. So it's half the chest, like from edge to edge. What is that number? So that is always like, okay, now I'm working with jersey, then I need to, if I want to compare it to like the body measurement, like what's the difference, then I need to, take it times 2 to be able to like more easily compare it to the body measurements. So that's why it's like so convenient to always just have this one around your neck and easy to analogically calculate, because I don't have the like, I could do it in my head as well, of course, but more convenient.
Yeah, it's a very low tech calculator. So you should. I'm also you brought up an interesting point about the reverse side, because obviously in Sweden we use the metric system, centimeters, and I've seen now that more and more measuring tapes have on the reverse side inches. So I'm really curious, you that live in countries that still use the imperial systems, when you get measuring tape, do you have centimeters on one side and have inches on the other side, or do you have inches on both sides? So that's, and I also I have purposely gotten measuring tape with inches on the reverse side, but that's only for sewing content, especially when I'm doing my books and everything, because I need to quickly see exactly what something is in inches. But I never ever use that measuring tape for my own personal sewing, because I find it extremely confusing when you reverse the sides. So that's where I'm really curious to see if what type of measuring tapes you have when you're using the imperial system.
Yeah, no, and it's I mean, of course, if you have both ways, like centimeters and inches, of course you can sell it to either country. It doesn't matter. So I understand from a production point of view why you would have it, but I definitely prefer when it's centimeter on both sides.
Yeah.
But what's your next sewing tool you got?
Yes, so my next sewing tool I have, which I talked about in a previous episode, which I had recommended you listen to, where we talked about how to draft patterns from existing garments. So we went on a couple of tangents, as we always do when we do this podcast. We talk about a lot of other stuff. And one of the things I talked about is the fact that I use pattern weights that are metal washers. And these are, Malena, you who have some experience in the construction world, what exactly washers, what can they be used for?
I would say if you are using a really heavy like screw, so the screw doesn't go into the wood, like then you have that metal thing to stop the head basically from going into some more softer material. I'm guessing now. yeah,
I think it is exactly. It protects the surface, right? So, and usually these you will find them on pretty much anything. Usually these are quite small and thin, but the ones I'm holding in my hand now, these washers are really heavy duty. So I think they are about 2 inches wide, and I think they are about, which is 5 centimeters, and I think they are about 5-6 millimeters thick, or a little bit more than that, which is a quarter of an inch. Which means that they are actually quite heavy. And these washers I use for, instead of pattern weights, and because they're so small and tiny, they're very easy to, they're never in the way when you are cutting. And you can get these in smaller and wider. I bought these on Amazon because I saw this tip somewhere. So sorry, apologies to the person who showed me this. That was so long ago, I don't remember. But you can also go to your hardware store, and the only thing you have to think about is that they need to be heavy and thick. So they can't be the light ones, the washers that we normally think about. And I have a set, I think, about 15 or 20. So that's, sometimes these have disappeared too, which is the strangest thing. But I used to have around 20, and I don't think I need more than that ever. So that's a really good budget-friendly tips, because if you want to get pattern weights, we talked about that in that episode too. It's so interesting, or it makes business sense, that when you put a hobby label on something, the exact same product can increase in price 2 or 3 times as much. So if you were to buy something that was dedicated as pattern weights, you would probably not get these you would probably have to pay 3 times as much to get the same amount of pattern weights for no better function, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's I've heard, I've seen it in a few places that they used other things, and one on Instagram that's like, I just use a fork and a knife and whatever cutlery I got around.
What do you use? What do you use when you're cutting?
Well, scissors, so I always just pin the paper pattern to the fabric with regular pins. So I don't use anything special.
I should say that one thing that at least I am a big believer of is not to overpin when you are cutting fabric, because every time you pinch the fabric a little bit. So if you start pinning too many pieces because you're worried about them slipping, you might actually distort the fabric layer, so you might end up cutting, the piece will be larger, so when you remove the pin, when you flatten out the fabric piece, you might have a few millimeters more than you have intended. So how do you do, Malena? What's your way of dealing with this potential issue?
Yeah, I usually pin 5 centimeters, like 2 inches away from the edge. So I don't pin like exactly at the edge. So then, and I usually work with jersey. So then it doesn't really affect the cutting line. So that's I sometimes also the fabric like gets a little bit stuck in the needle and like get pulled, and so yeah, I don't pin so closely to the edge, and I don't pin a lot either. Like as you say, like use as few pins as possible, and also I use pins because maybe for some reason I don't sew it immediately after, and then all the pattern pieces and the fabric pieces are like still pinned together. I remove the pattern and the pins when I'm going to sew it. So it could be like, in a little bundle in a pile, like that project, and I know exactly which pattern pieces are which because I haven't removed the pattern. So that's just an easy way for me to keep track of what is what.
Yeah, that's a good thing about using pins. I agree, because you have it attached always. Because that's a drawback of using. But I usually do the same thing afterwards, that I pin the pattern piece to the fabric just in case. So that's a really good idea. And if not, I usually put some freezer tape or something like on the pattern piece where I mark, which is the right side, and what type of thing it is, if it has a pattern number, for instance, because sometimes you do cut and it's no fun when when you finally get around to sewing it, and you're like, if it's a more complicated garment, if there's lots of pieces, you're like, which was this, the back yoke or the front yoke? It can get a little bit confusing, especially with lots of different pieces when you're building a garment together. So it's always good to keep the pattern piece close to the fabric piece. I agree.
And usually on a good pattern, like they have enough of notches that you should be able to easily figure out which pieces are what, and so it's not like it should not be possible to be able to mix them out. The notches should be in places that are like not on the same level if you have like lots of different panels, so like it should not be able to mix them up. But things happen.
Yeah, things happen.
I know.
Yeah.
So I always have a habit to always have the pattern and fabric together as long as possible until I'm actually starting to sew.
So do you have any more tools to share with us?
No, that was actually it from my side. So I'm very, very basic. It was like pincushion, scissors, and measurement tape. Like that's how basic I am. Do you have anything else in your stock?
I'm definitely gonna. I of course, I think this episode proves that I am the gearhead in this podcast too, because I think I have at least 5 more stuff, but I won't talk about that. And it took me like 1 minute to gather together. So if I had more time, I'd probably had twice as much. But we can do a follow-up episode. But one thing I'm holding in my hand, which I think we also mentioned in previous episodes, is it's a piece of plastic. It's a small piece of plastic, and it's called a hump jumper, or a height level tool, or it's also called a Ginamig. So it's a piece of plastic that you insert underneath the presser foot, because when you're sewing over uneven and bulky layers, the presser foot can't stay flat because it has to move like up the hill and down the hill. And the problem is that then it's really hard for it to form proper stitching, because it doesn't get like close contact with the entire surface, which means that you will often end up with skip stitches, or you will probably see also that you get one of these really long stitches instead of the small stitches that you had in mind. And this piece of plastic is sometimes included in your sewing machine kit, and if it's not, it's very, very inexpensive. There are a lot of different versions. The one I'm holding here is actually has two sides to it. It's a gray piece that has a lower level and a higher level, so you can use which one you need. And so once you have once you got on the top of something, you remove it, and then you keep sewing, and then when it's time to go downhill again, then you insert it at the front of the presser foot instead, and you just stitch just a couple of stitches and then remove it. And then as long as the presser foot is fairly level again, horizontal, then you can remove the piece. And it has these slots inserted, so that there's no risk that you will hit the hump jumper with the needle. It's very, very, very user friendly, and especially if you're sewing, say, jeans. I guess I would also guess bags, things like that, heavy duty stuff, which has a lot of bumps and thick layers. I think the hump jumper is crucial, because you have to keep the presser foot straight. It's a unsung important thing to know, that the presser foot needs to be straight as much as possible, because if it's not, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, and here again, I think it's like a great tool for home sewists. In the industry, I mean, I can't swear, I don't think they use anything like this, because they have such professional machines. But we have home sewing machines, then we need to have these extra gadgets to help out to get that professional finish. So that is, I have never tried one, but if I would use like sew a bag or something, like I would definitely, or like a really heavy fabric, I would definitely use one.
Yeah. You bring up a good point, especially it's the quality of the sewing machine as well, and its ability to form stitches on thicker layers. And a lot of home sewing machines, I mean, they are not equipped to do the kind of sewing that they do in the garment industry. So we definitely, that's a reason why we sometimes have to rely on these like extra tools, because we are working with completely different equipments and skill levels as well. So anything that helps us sew straighter or better, I think it's a very welcome addition. So that's why I'm a little bit of a gearhead, I think, because I like the kind of stuff that helps me cheat a little bit to get a more professional finish, even though I'm working with I'm not a professional sewist or have professional equipment.
Yeah, and anything that helps. But what else do you got? Four more things. I'm curious now.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to save these to a follow-up episode, because because we already talked almost an hour now on this. But you're going to be a follow-up episode there, and I also have a few more stuff that I really love, and I can definitely think up at least 5 more until the next episode. And maybe you can think of a couple of more as well. And of course, if you're listening to this episode, please comment on our Instagram account, Stitching Tales Pod, or our YouTube channel, Stitching Tales Pod, because then you can share your favorite tools, and maybe we can also address those as well in a follow-up episode to this, because it's so great to share this stuff. And apart from my high-end Kai scissors, nothing is expensive. I mean, it's really cheap stuff. So you don't have to break the bank just to get really good, helpful tools, I think. So anyways, I think that was about it, Malena. I should also say we're going to link to some of this stuff as well in the show notes, and I have a blog post where I show some of the stuff as well, which I talk about here as well. We can go out and see them for yourself, and I also recommend watching the video version. If you're going to watch one video of us doing this podcast, this is definitely the one, I think. Don't you agree, Malena?
Yeah, if you want to see my walk of shame. My needle cushion that needs a little bit of an update.
Yeah, that one, and those incredibly sharp bent pins, also great content.
I will definitely take pictures of them and upload them on Instagram as well, so you can see them there as well.
You should definitely, and also remember to post the pin cushion as well over there. And I'm also going to make sure that I will upload some of the stuff that I showed you here as well, because we do understand the limitation of the audio format for sure in this episode. But anyways, thank you so much for staying with us for an entire hour just talking about great tools for sewing. I am Johanna Lundström.
And I am Malena Hjerpe. Bye
bye.